Hey, good afternoon. It's Dr. P, and I am coming to you from Dirigo Food Safety and the Smallholder Food Business Development Institute up here in scenic Yarmouth, Maine. And I am coming to you for Facebook Live office hours because around here we are all about making the whole process of food safety and starting your food business a lot easier. So a couple of announcements to start out with for those of you who don't know. I've started a podcast actually, and you can find me every week. They're released at the Smallholder Food Business Development Institute podcast. We have a really amazing lineup of talks that I give. It's only me on the podcast. I don't have guests as of yet. And we talk about all different sorts of things around the pillars of kind of how we go about working with food businesses here at the company. You know, we of course do technical documentation, we do marketing coaching because frankly a lot of folks don't understand what their markets are asking, and you can't do your food safety the way you need to unless you know what your markets are asking for. And I help people with employees and employee issues and getting the employees to do the things that you need to do. And then I help CEOs and managers and executives figure out what are the things that they need to do to build the businesses that they mean to build. And so these Facebook Live office hours are all about delivering both technical content and those other parts of our services so that you can understand what we do here, because there's so much out there, you know, and frankly, I have all this information in my head and it's not doing me any good sitting in my head. So I actually give it away. And so that's what we are doing here today for office hours. And we're going to be here for, 20-30 minutes like we usually do. I try and do these every other Tuesday. We took a holiday break and I was traveling, which sometimes makes it super difficult. But they're all archived, so feel free to, join us via archive. So let's kind of get down to it. We're covering 3 basic topics today that have been in the news or otherwise things that you need to hear. So the first thing is that you may have heard that the FDA and the CDC pulled all the Romaine off the shelves right before Thanksgiving. And I'm not talking about, kind of the reaction of how our regulators dealt with the Romaine outbreak, but much more around what's going on with raw, ready-to-eat produce. Okay, so I have a lot of clients that do raw, ready-to-eat produce, and the question is how do you do food safety? Well, we're coming out with a video series. You actually should be getting an email later today around how to sign up for this video series. And I'm going through a raw, ready-to-eat HACCP. Like I'm doing a whole HACCP in that video series, 25 minutes, best HACCP plan you'll ever find in 25 minutes. And the reason I'm doing that is because raw, ready-to-eat produce is both either super simple or super complicated to do food safety for. But here's how I approach it. If you do your prerequisite programs correctly, you can create the conditions to create safe food. So now, when I say that and I say programs, people often don't understand what I mean, okay? And this is super important in raw produce because you have to do everything correctly to create the effect of having pathogen-free produce out in the marketplace. So what is that, like, what on earth does that all mean? Well, here's what I want you to think about. I want you to think about going to a baseball game, okay? And you have parked, you've gotten your ticket, and you're all ready. You hand your ticket over and they check your bag and you can smell the beer and you can smell the hot dogs and the French fries and the ketchup, and it's all super exciting, right? And you walk in and all of a sudden you hear programs, get your programs. And you fork over $20 to get a program, and then you walk over to the concession stand and you plan for it, so you're going to fork over more money for the world's most expensive hot dog, fries, and beer. And then you go up and you sit down and you open your program, okay? And there you are, the sun is shining, but it's not too hot. You're wearing a ball cap and sunscreen, and you're reading through the programs. And you've got your program, and you've got advertisements, you've got a note from the owner, you've got a note from somebody else who decided to write something in the program, and then you've got all the player bios, and you've got all the player statistics. and you're super excited. And then kind of at the back, you know how you have you can keep track of the game, because really, you know, like, I really think that baseball by and large is an excuse for people to do statistics. So anyway, as the game gets together, you as the fan are coming prepared, and you read the player bios and you read the player stats, and you are looking all throughout the book, getting all the information that you can to create the conditions to create a fun game. Are there other things that have to happen for the game to be super fun? Of course. You know, it's always nice when the team we're rooting for wins. And by the way, go Army, beat Navy. We're going to kill them this weekend. It's going to be amazing. So you always want your team to win, but there's very little you as a fan can do about that, right? So you're sitting there with your programs, and you go through and you're looking at everything, and you've got all of your information, and you're ready to keep track of what happens during the game so you can talk about statistics. Well, prerequisite programs are kind of the same thing. They're written down, okay? They often come in a book, okay? Maybe fewer advertisements in a prerequisite programs book, but it's a binder full of stuff, okay? And much like we have player bios and player stats and advertisements and essays and things like that in this book, we have the same thing for prerequisite programs. And I want you to think about those prerequisite programs as a gathering of all the information that's pertinent to one topic. So if one topic is one of the players, okay, you have his bio and his on one page, okay, or on a portion of a page where you hear about where he played in high school and where he played in college and what he does in the off season when he's not at the gym. Okay, but then he has his stats on the other, when you have all the stats lined up for all the players. Well, that's just like good manufacturing practices, okay? Your program in your baseball program is the whole team, right? Your prerequisite programs is everything that you do to create the conditions to create safe food. And each individual player is like a GMP, okay? But we have information in different spots, because it really wouldn't make sense to people when they're keeping track of how players are doing and want to compare stats if they had all the bio information together. That's not generally how the way people read. And so GMPs are the same way. We sprinkle GMPs through the prerequisite program, that whole binder where you find all your information. We group all the stuff about sanitation together, and we call that a sanitation program. We group how everybody is supposed to show up in the facility under the personal hygiene program, how to wash your hands, how to wear your beard net, how to wear your hair net, all that sort of stuff. Those are all parts of GMPs, but we put them in their own special set of program, the sanitation program, the personal hygiene program. We have glass breakage programs. We have labeling. We have tracing and lotting. Tons of programs that we write. And all together, they create your prerequisite programs. And your GMPs are part of those prerequisite programs. Okay, and so much like your baseball program has advertisements and stats and bios and notes and everything else that's in a baseball program, your prerequisite programs are comprised of your SOP. So that's a listing out of how we do it here. What are you actually supposed to do? That's called an SOP, a standard operating procedure. Those SOPs create logs, okay? That's where you record how we did it here, okay? And then sometimes, many times, those logs have registers where you record how you recorded stuff, because a lot of times we have audits. So that's what programs are. That's what we talk about when we talk about programs. And if you implement your programs correctly, you create the conditions to create safe food. But what does this have to do with raw, ready-to-eat produce? It has everything to do with raw, ready-to-eat produce. If you bring all of your seeds and grow inputs in, and your seeds and grow inputs don't have salmonella, shigatoxin E. coli, or listeria, you are much less likely to have salmonella, shigatoxin E. coli, and listeria in your final product. Okay, if you test your soil, if you're doing a field grow, or if you test your water and your peat moss and that sort of thing, if you're in a hydroponic grow, and make sure that your soil doesn't have salmonella, shigatoxin E. coli, and listeria. Listeria in soil might be a little bit difficult, but you might need to speciate for Listeria monocytogenes. If you do that, okay, that you are doing so much to create the conditions to create safe food. Okay, then you harvest and you make sure your water doesn't have Salmonella, Shigatoxin E. coli. It would be super weird for it to have Listeria, but you make sure your surfaces don't have Listeria, that you're cleaning correctly. All right, that's how you create the conditions to create safe food. You make sure you're cleaning your harvester. You make sure you're cleaning your bagging line. You make sure you're keeping everything the temperature that it needs to be kept. Okay, are there critical control points in raw, ready-to-eat produce? There may not be. Okay, you can still write a HACCP plan anyway. A HACCP plan without critical control points is still a HACCP plan. It just doesn't have any CCPs. But what you have done is documented your commitment to creating the conditions to create safe food. Okay, nobody knows what's going on really out in California. Some of us have our suspicions. It may very well be surface irrigation water from concentrated animal feeding operations. We don't know. Okay, it could be coming in from the seeds. There are only a limited number of people of seed companies that create seeds on that scale. All right, we really don't know what's going on. But if each individual company, and if you as a company are making sure that you know what's coming in, okay, you're making sure you're doing all your GMPs correctly, and you make sure that you're doing everything to create the conditions to create safe food, then you should be okay. All right, and you can still put raw, ready-to-eat produce out there. I am not of the opinion that washing romaine lettuce or washing any raw lettuce or greens or whatever makes them safer. It prevents cross-contamination from, you know, like one peach to the next peach. But if you haven't grown everything correctly, you're not going to fix it by washing it. That doesn't happen. You can't wash it well enough to fix getting rid of Shigatoxin E. coli on raw produce. It just can't happen. So anyway, so keep that in mind for those people out there who make raw products. I'm talking about produce today, but you could very well be talking about a lot of different other things. On the raw product thing, I just want to add one little caveat for the meat producers out there, is that there is a lot of talk, given the turkey recalls over Thanksgiving, which we never like to see, about making salmonella an adulterant. I think this is ridiculous. I'm going to be contacting my congresspeople and other congresspeople and doing work in the policy work that I do to try and protect small meat and poultry processors from salmonella declared as an adulterant. We already have performance standards for salmonella. They're already like having trouble meeting those performance standards. The big poultry houses are having trouble meeting the performance standards. So adding stricter standards, if you're not already meeting the standards, doesn't matter. And it doesn't actually decrease the amount of salmonella that people are getting sick from, because most people are not getting their salmonella from poultry, believe it or not. They're getting it from like bakery products and chocolate and other higher risk items, frankly, than poultry, because we cook poultry, right? So anyway, so that's raw product, raw ready-to-eat produce. By all means, ask questions. Email me if you have any questions. You can get in touch with me at sfbdi.com, or no, sfbdi@dirigoFoodSafety.com. Sorry, I give you the email address, not the website. Okay, so that's that. So the next thing I want to talk about is cooperative interstate shipments. Last week in Maine, of course, we're in Maine here, Dr. Eberly, our meat and poultry veterinarian, and her group up in Augusta created an agreement with the USDA where we would have something called cooperative interstate shipments, which means Maine inspected meat can go across state lines. There are a couple other states that are doing this. This is super exciting. I already have a client who is going to be doing Maine inspection instead of USDA inspection. So that's kind of what I want to talk about, is that decision-making process. If you are in a state with a meat and poultry inspection program, one, I think it's worth it to contact your meat and poultry veterinarian and see if you can't get cooperative interstate shipments, because it's awesome. And two, then you have to decide, once you get it, and people in Maine who are listening, what you have to decide is whether or not your market cares if you have a USDA stamp of inspection or a Maine stamp of inspection. If you are selling to small producers, the likelihood that they care is non-existent. I mean, they don't care. If you're selling your meat to a restaurant, the food code says you have to have inspected meat. That's all. Okay, it doesn't say USDA inspected. It says inspected meat. So go with the lower work option, which is which is frankly your state inspection program. It's less work most of the time. So, but if you want to get into larger retail outlets, most of the time they are going to require USDA inspection. Even though it would be completely legal to sell state inspected meat, they may very well require USDA inspection. And so what I would do is I would talk to them. Okay, my recommendation is always talk to your customers. Okay, and if you want to figure out how to have those conversations and things like that, you can sign up for a blueprint, and you can find out about that at sfbdi.com/blueprint, and we'll and I'll talk to you about, you know, what are the benefits and what are the results of working with you and what's your product specification, so you can go have those conversations and you can figure out what your client actually wants and make a reasoned decision after that. Okay, so if you have the opportunity, call your meat and poultry veterinarian, ask about implementing cooperative interstate shipments, because I think it's going to be super, super good for our small producers here. And it's going to, you know, improve our state system, make it more robust, and alleviate some of the issues that we have with USDA sending, you know, Maine's a big state. You know, USDA doesn't always have somebody to send all the way up to the county and up 95 there. Okay, so get in touch with your meat and poultry veterinarian about that. If you are in one of the states that doesn't have a meat and poultry program, I'm very sorry. Come to Maine, we have one. Okay, so then next, I want to talk about validation. I am getting a ton of questions about validation because this is all of a sudden a super big deal for the FDA. Okay, for USDA, we always had to validate stuff, but here's what's fun. Because we always had to validate stuff for the USDA by and large gave us all of the scientific documentation we needed to actually validate it. The FDA has done no such thing. And it is ridiculous in my opinion, but that's what we're here for, because we take all the confusion around the regulations and the science and all that sort of stuff and give it to you in like ways you can actually use it. So here's the deal about validation. So validation is when you use scientific documentation to prove what you are doing is actually useful to control foodborne illness. Okay, so if you are putting a ready-to-eat food out in the marketplace, you have to make sure that it doesn't have salmonella. Most of the time, that's by creating what we call a 5-log reduction in salmonella. And what you end up validating is you took this food, okay, you did something to it, and you got rid of salmonella. All right. This can become surpassingly difficult because we don't have a chart like we have for fish and listeria. We don't have Appendix A like we have in USDA processing. And so companies are left on their own on how to figure out how to do this. And it's really difficult. So there are a couple of things I want to talk about. The first one is ignoring it is not an option, because the FDA will figure it out eventually. You must, if you are at the size where you need a preventive controls plan, and that's what I'm talking about, if you are at the size that you need a preventive controls plan, you must validate. It is not optional. Okay, you must say, I have this preventive control, so it's a process preventive control. So you're cooking something, you're cooking your dough, all right, to kill salmonella, because that's the target pathogen of concern in dough. And you have to say, this is the scientific documentation that says if I cook to this temperature, 206 degrees for 3 minutes, I kill salmonella in dough. You have to find, we have that documentation, and you have to write your preventive controls plan to that documentation. That's the first part of validation, okay? Then the second part of validation is where once you have all of that done, you actually put the system into place in your facility, and you do all what we call your verification, which is where you write down, I'm at this time, I'm at this temperature, and you initial it, and you date and time and all that good sort of stuff, okay? You take all of that information, all of those pieces of paper, and you bring them together, and you look at them and say, okay, what does this tell me about my system? I said I was going to meet 206 degrees for 3 minutes. Let me look at these pieces of paper and say, did I meet 206 degrees for 3 minutes? And we ask that for either 13 executions of the preventive controls plan or 3 months, whichever takes longer. Okay, that's validation. I wish I had better ways to tell you that this is what the FDA requires, but this is what the FDA requires. It is a mandated part of preventive controls. You must validate your preventive controls. There are 2 parts of this validation. The first one is finding the scientific documentation, and the second one is proving that you actually followed the scientific documentation and you are actually creating safe food using that process in your facility. Okay, please do not wing it, because the FDA is getting wise to that, and it's super painful for companies who are winging it. If you have co-packers, you're not exempt from knowing this. It's your brand out there. And if there's a recall, it's your brand that's hurt. So ask your co-packer, if you have a ready-to-eat food, have they validated their food safety plan to make sure they have a 5-log reduction of salmonella? And if they look at you like you're crazy, this is potentially not the co-packer you need to be using. Okay, so if you're interested in this set of topics, we're actually coming out with a video series. Like I said, you should be getting an email today. We're going to be doing a video a day over the course of the next 6 days, and we're covering all sorts of amazing topics. We are covering what I call the food safety triangle about education, prerequisite programs, and HACCP planning. I'm going to talk about anxiety, okay? Because you know what? Running a business is anxiety producing. Being a QA manager is anxiety producing. And let's talk about it. And then we're going to be talking about your supply chain and how you deal with your co-packers and how you create supply chain programming. As I mentioned earlier, I'm actually doing the 4th video in the series is a raw, ready-to-eat HACCP about mushrooms, using mushrooms as an example. The 4th video, I'm going to do the world's most amazing food safety science class. Like, what do I mean when I talk about salmonella, Shigatoxin, E. coli, and Listeria? Why does it matter? And what's the science behind what we do? And then finally, I'm going to talk about construction and facilities, because I have a ton of clients, and I have a ton of people actually call me, should I do construction? Should I build a new facility? Of course, we have the locker. Look for some new videos on that. Because the space issue is real, and the space issue is getting worse, okay? And so people need to go into spending money on space, understanding the trade-offs of what they are doing. So look for those video series. We're going to be doing these video series actually once a quarter, I've decided. And so if you have specific things that you'd like me to cover in next quarter's video series, let me know. So thanks, you've been a great audience. I hope everybody has a great day. And I just love it if you wanted to come and visit us, subscribe to the podcast, sfbdi.com/podcast. So we're the Smallholder Food Business Development Institute podcast, wherever you hear your podcasts. Okay, then we have the blueprint, which is of course where you can get on the phone with me. It's actually only $1 to get on the calendar. And then we go through and we have a half-hour call and we talk about your results. We talk about the benefits of working with you, and we talk about specifications. Super, super helpful. I do this with every client. And for coming up into the new year, I'm actually doing a super special on it where after the phone call, it's $97. But if you didn't get all that value out of it, then you just send me a note in 24 hours and I will not charge your credit card. And so basically you get a half-hour call with me for free, almost, for $1. And then finally we have, if you want to dive deeper into this stuff, if you really want help applying all of the things that we talk about in your business, in your life to drive yourself forward, we have the SFBDI Power Group, and this is a group of supercharged individuals who are going out and making the difference in smallholder food that we know it can make. So thanks so much. You all have a great rest of your afternoon. Holler at me with questions. We're here when you need us. Thanks. Bye.